Contrary here for week 7 of the NFL. Going to take you to all the deep, dark places other DFS and fantasy shows won't take you to with our controversial opinions about a variety of things. Of course, as always, I'm Chris Spags, joined by the top DFS player in the world, the namesake of this site, and one of the greatest guys I know, Alex Baker, better known as Osimo. How are you doing, Alex?
Thanks, Chris. That means a lot to me that you said that here. I'm doing great, man. I love this show because every single week, anybody could win you like so much money in DFS. It could be the worst guy in the league, Mitch Trubisky, maybe. No matter how bad they are, they have a chance, and they're worth talking about a little bit. So looking forward to breaking it down with you guys.
Yeah, and we have a lot to talk about this week because we have another great guest who's also one of the greatest guys I know. I'm just giving that compliment out to everybody today. Matt Harmon, welcome on board. It's really great to have you on the contrary.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. We were talking before we got rolling here. You know, this is a really interesting week with a lot of potential bounce back spots, a lot of intriguing matchups that, you know, I honestly could see going a lot of different ways. And that's the most fun when a slate that to me is that I can see multiple different outcomes and everything like that. And then that's really like our jobs, right? Is to kind of imagine and paint out these ranges of outcomes and then decide for our, you know, beautiful users and people out there where those most likely ranges of outcomes fall. So I'm excited to break it all down with you guys, and thank you so much for having me.
We've got a lot to talk about with Matt, but first let's get some of the dirty work out of the way up front. And it's not even that dirty because it is a home of official rake-free daily fantasy. The only place you will find it in the industry is at Fantasydraft.com. And thanks to them, we're able to bring you this show every week. So go to Fantasydraft.com right now and use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free 7-day trials and rake-free entries. And Alex, I have to ask you, every week we always like to talk about the dangers of rake in the industry and also the pitfalls of just what you're paying to all the sites. So what could you have bought this week if you had not paid rake on all the sites you're playing DFS on?
I mean, the bottom line is that you win more money when you cash in fantasy draft, and that came true for me a few weeks ago where I won third place. I got 30K. On a lot of sites that might have been 15 or 20K, and I haven't managed to live up to that glory in the previous 2 weeks, but it's a new week, man. I'm hoping you guys can give me some plays here so I can get back on top.
Yeah, Fantasydraft.com. We also have a video on the channel of our guy, Adam Scherer, shit my money, and his big takedown of his 100K win on Fantasy Draft. A lot of people have been doing well over there. So go check it out right now. Just not paying rake is a big advantage to you if you're trying to build your bankroll in DFS. Go to Fantasydraft.com right now and use that promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free 7-day trial. And Matt, before we get into everything here, I wanted to talk to you real fast because you've been around the industry for a while now, doing a lot of season-long stuff. You created the reception perception thing, one of your popular tropes, which has been on a ton of podcasts and a ton of content with the data you have with that. But obviously, Yahoo is shifting more towards a DFS mindset. The whole industry overall is kind of serving both the season-long and DFS masters, I guess you could say. How are you finding the shift to be? And I guess, has it changed anything in your process now that you're doing a little more DFS stuff? At least have to be aware of it more.
Well, yeah, I think the beautiful part of working for a company like Yahoo, one of the many beautiful parts about working for a company like Yahoo, let me just say that off the top, is that obviously we have our own DFS game, whereas when I was working at NFL.com, it was something you kind of had to mention, a little cloak and dagger situation. So with Yahoo, it's great that it's out there, and especially because, I think the great part about daily fantasy is it really reminds us that this is a week-to-week game. We spend so much time in the draft season talking about, which player's ADP is more tempting than the other. And then, as soon as the season starts, that's over. It doesn't matter anymore. They're what you did in the draft, it's don't even think about that. Who cares if you drafted this guy in round 3 and this guy in round 4? If they've got a better matchup, it doesn't even matter. And also, by the way, 60% of your team is probably going to be dead in the water by the time we even get to week 7. There are so many guys that you drafted that you don't even want to play anymore. So I think the great part about daily fantasy is it puts that extra emphasis, even for super casual players, to remember, okay, what really matters is these week-to-week matchups. It's projecting the game script of certain contests and deciding how that favors one unit over the other. And I think it also just makes the fantasy player that much smarter, because you have to know, if you're going to play daily fantasy, you have to know about so many different things. You can't just be coming in there like a fish with your, fantasy points allowed to whatever position. You've got to know about pace of play. You've got to know about, wide receiver cornerback matchups, which defenses get more pressure than others and how that might, funnel more targets to one position. So I think really the great part about it is it just makes everyone so much smarter, not just analysts, but even the fans and users. And I think that's good for the space.
You got to keep them honest. And one other thing, too, I want to hit on real fast, because your reception perception thing, that is really, there aren't a lot of things that are created out there by somebody, but that's something you've worked out for years and talk about in a lot of content. I've heard you talk about it at length on Christopher Harris's podcast. Give people, I guess, what you're looking at when you're talking about the data that you use for that stuff. And your breakdowns on Twitter are also great with some of the game film. So what can people expect from you with the reception perception stuff? Yeah,
reception perception is a methodology that I developed almost like 6 years ago now at this point, or that was when the idea was first formed. And I've been charting data for the last 5 NFL seasons. Basically what I'm doing is going in and over an 8-game sample for a player's film. I'm charting every single route that they run, which routes do they get the most open on, which coverages are they most successful at creating separation. So, the thing about wide receivers is every metric that you can look at with a wide receiver, it is inherently dependent on another position. It has to, obviously the quarterback has to get them the ball. The play call has to dictate that they are one of the first few reads. The offensive line has to provide the time for a deep threat to get downfield. It's one of the most difficult positions to isolate a player and their own individual performance. And that's the goal of reception perception, is trying to quantify the qualitative reality of which wide receivers are the best route runners in the NFL. So I think it opens up that extra layer of insight for fantasy players in particular to how does this guy score his fantasy points? Because I think when you're constructing weekly lineups, whether it's in a season-long league or a DFS league, you have to obviously keep in mind, like, what's the way that this guy scores points. It's not just he's averaging this many or whatever. It's this guy's that short area threat, this guy's that vertical threat. And then even beyond that, I think it just, again, shines light on players that could be in line for more opportunity. They might perform better because, Allen Robinson's the best example. Early hit in the series was like, okay, when this guy starts getting volume, he's getting separation and winning routes like a top level NFL receiver, and then obviously goes out and leads the NFL in touchdowns the next year. So that's the beauty of the series, is I think it really shines light on what players do well and who's the most successful in the league, isolated from just their quarterback or their offense.
Yeah, a lot of Matt's views on that stuff can be found on his Twitter at @MattHarmon_BYB. What does the BYB stand for?
Backyard Banter, my first NFL website that it's still up there, thebackyardbanter.com. I have a lot of personal stories and stuff up there on that website as well. So that's what it stands for. And it's one of those things, like, so once you have the blue check, you can't change your Twitter handle, because then the check goes away. And if the check goes away, well, who am I really? I'm just kind of lost in the wilderness. So I like to say that it's essentially like, I have the _BYB is objectively not good. It's not fun to read on air. It's not fun to look at. People ask me about it all the time. JJ Zacharyson and Denny Carter, their listeners on the Living Extreme podcast, rip me for the boy young boy thing all the time. So I like to say that basically it's like I got an ex's name tattooed on me. I can't do anything about it. It's just there now, and you got to live with it for the rest of your life.
It could be _BYOB, and then you'd be the cool party guy, Matt Harmon.
Right. But unfortunately, it's not.
Well, you know what? You're repping the brand. It's all you can do. And those verified checks, Alex, I don't think you have one yet. That's the one thing that Matt and I have over you, is we both have blue checks. So take that, boss.
On behalf of us non-blue checks, take this advice into consideration. Change your screen name while you can. Make sure it's something you want to really live with.
You're keeping it underground and grimy. You're keeping it real with a man of the people with no blue check. But let's keep going here. Obviously, on the contrary, we're going to go cover all the main games here that are picking up the most ownership, some of the highest implied totals, all the key things you need to talk about. So, guys, hit that like button, because all of the picks and conversation we have, it's only going to be as good as the amount of likes we get. That's just the most direct correlation play we have on the show. So go do that right now. And let's get it going here with a game with the Rams at Atlanta. And this one is really interesting to me. We talked about Jared Goff, some of the reasons we didn't like him last week. I was very down on him. I think, Alex, you were down on him pretty well as well. And he ended up really having one of the worst games of his career. Now he's going into Atlanta, a spot where Atlanta's terrible. They also have just been not defending anything well. And also they're scoring a lot too. So you have to score and keep up with them in a variety of ways. So let's talk about Goff up front here. Alex, I'll talk to you first. Goff, is he a player that you're wanting to go to this week? His ownership's going to be pretty high, though not terribly high. And it does seem like a time to buy while there's blood in the streets.
I think so. Matt brought up pace of play, and I think that's an important stat here. The Rams, I've read, they've been the fastest team as far as pace of play this year. I use kind of a metric that incorporates last year's data too, but weights this year's data more heavily, and I have them as second to Arizona overall. Atlanta comes in 8th as far as fastest pace. So these are two up-tempo teams, and when you combine them, that's just more plays that you're going to get fancy points in a game. To top it off, Atlanta's defense is not good. And Jared Goff, he's got some great targets, so I think that Goff makes a really nice play this week.
Matt, how are you feeling about Goff? Because that was really an atrocious performance against him, but San Francisco did check a lot of the boxes for why Goff is bad. They pressure well, they defend well on the outside, and Goff has been really bad under pressure, also really bad throwing a deep ball this year for whatever that's worth. But how are you feeling about Goff going into a dome, a road game where he's not been great on the road, but this seems like about as safe of a road spot as you could want for him?
Yeah, all those things that you said that San Francisco does really well that Goff struggles under, Atlanta doesn't do any of that. You know, they don't put pressure on the passer. They have just 5 sacks this year. Vic Beasley's on the trade block, and the Falcons are giving him, kind of it's hot, they're like, I think a change of scenery will do well for him. It'll be fine. Just take him on, like a little bit of damning with faint praise there. Give me a break. Like, obviously he's been a bust. This whole team is not good at putting pressure on the passer, as we mentioned. They're the 31st ranked pass defense in DVOA. They allowed the second highest yards after the catch. But they also get ripped up on the deep ball too. So you can beat them in multiple different ways. And I think it's a great bounce back spot for Jared Goff. I think you still have to, keep that floor expectation in mind, because this offense is just not looked in sync, and the offensive line is still very problematic. And, a player like Grady Jarrett for Atlanta is kind of the one bright spot on that interior rusher side. So I think you just have to keep in mind that there is some potential for a floor game for Jared Goff, but I think the ceiling is really tempting, especially with guys like Robert Woods, who's 12th among wide receivers in targets, that I think you can buy back in on this week. I was looking at your guys' ownership projections, and he's really high up there, and I think that makes a lot of sense, considering I think he is in for this rebound performance, and especially with Desmond Trufant looking like, he's going to miss this game. So to me, I think it's a great spot to buy back in on Goff.
So, Matt, you're a receiver expert, so I'm sure you've done a good amount of tape watching on the Rams receivers. Cooper Kupp's been the pretty far target leader by a wide margin, much wider than I think you would think based on their performances last year. How are you feeling about the receivers here? You mentioned Robert Woods. Brandon Cooks, also pretty cheap, a guy who's been a deep threat, but really not having a lot of deep threat mojo going with Goff this year. So which receivers would you favor here? I guess if you had to rank them, how would you rank the 3 big guys? And also Gerald Everett in the mix too.
Yeah, Gerald Everett is always interesting, especially because he's been running more routes, and I think he's pretty much, like, for season-long players, I think he's pretty much a fantasy starter right now, considering just how bad the position is, and that he has a pretty high range of outcomes. So when you look at the receivers, I think Cooper Kupp is still the number 1 in this offense, and I think it doesn't even necessarily have to do with, like, he's the clear better player than the other two, but it dawned on me this offseason that I'm spending so much time with wide receivers as I'm charting for reception perception. You eventually start to realize that you're spending a lot of time with the quarterback position as well. And you start to see certain types of passers favor certain types of wide receivers. And Jared Goff, it's just very clear that he likes to see things before before he actually makes that decision. I think he's a pretty good post-snap quarterback. And the fact that he does like to throw the ball into rather wide windows, he's not necessarily inclined to force things. You look at a guy like Cooper Kupp, who in reception perception last year ran more routes against zone coverage than any player that I've charted before, was the second fewest routes with press coverage. He often sees those wide windows, and I think that's why he and Goff just click so much, because that's the type of player Goff wants to work with. And when you look at Robert Woods, I like him a little more than Cooks this week because, like I said, there's that touchdown regression coming, 12th in targets, hasn't scored through the air yet. He did get a rushing touchdown last week, but I like him as that bounce back player this week, and because he can do a little bit of both. He can do that underneath stuff and can also work outside and on the sideline, whereas Cooks is rather just, streaking through the middle of the field and down the field, So I think that's the way I'd rank it this week. I'd go Kupp, Woods, and then Cooks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, you mentioned one thing about Jared Goff and the quick release for him. He's a guy whose QB rating drops off of a cliff if he holds onto the ball over 2.5 seconds. He has a QB rating of 61.4. he gets rid of it fast. He's at 104.4. So that is a very big difference for him. So if he's seeing things cleanly like he should against Atlanta, that's going to help him out quite a bit. Alex, how are you feeling about the receivers here? We're going to have Cooper Kupp looks like he'll have the most ownership, but Brandon Cook's cheap and not going to be owned as much as you might think, given the fact that he is cheap and just seems due for a bounce back. So how would you rank these guys?
Well, the name of the show is Contrary, so I'll have to go against Matt here and say that I like Cooks a lot. I mean, I think they're all great plays, to be fair, but Cooks has done the most with the targets he's gotten over the past year and a half compared to Kupp and Woods. Cooks has caught 2/3 of the balls and average 15 yards per catch, which is the best per target of any of the guys. So while he gets the fewest targets, especially this year so far, I think he still has great potential.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about the run game? Somebody in the YouTube chat is asking about, I guess, Gurley, and I think we also have Malcolm Brown. I believe he's doubtful. I'm not sure if he's been officially ruled out. But Darryl Henderson as well looked kind of explosive, looked better than Brown last week. So, Alex, how do you feel about Gurley if you want to talk contrarian? Going to Gurley this week seems like to be very contrarian despite his price being fairly low.
Yeah, his price is low, but compared to some other guys that see bigger workloads, like Leonard Fournette, I mean, it's pretty comparable. So he's not my favorite option. I think on Yahoo, where he's $23, that's probably the site that I would prefer him the most. And I'm also interested a little bit in Darryl Henderson, a guy that is kind of touted as someone who can do well out of the backfield on third downs, and he's really cheap across the industry, $3,500 on DraftKings. And we see every week some guys go out for injury, and Gurley is one of the more likely to do so. So I think Henderson could be just kind of a sneaky dart throw if no one's on him.
All right, Matt, let's throw it back to you on the Atlanta side. Matt Ryan, your fellow Matt, going to be pretty highly owned again this week. He's been very popular the last few weeks. And the Rams defense, hasn't been great. Obviously, the addition of Jalen Ramsey should help things out a bit. But it seems like that's more something that's going to affect Julio Jones than it will the entire Atlanta offense, I guess you could say. So how are you feeling about Atlanta's prospects here? And I guess how do you think the Jalen Ramsey addition affects things? He's just one player, so I don't know if he could fix everything, but will he materially help things out?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that they're going to play Jalen Ramsey, obviously. I mean, I like to say that nobody used to have a bad back, because once you have a bad back, you have a bad back. But it seems like Jalen Ramsey may have just never had a bad back. And because he's out there, he's gonna be rolling this week. And I actually think that wouldn't scare me too much off Julio Jones, because this is a guy who hasn't played for a couple of weeks, and even if he has been healthy and just not playing because he wanted to get out of town, I still think that could favor Julio Jones in this one individual matchup in Jalen Ramsey's first game with a new team, and again coming off a little bit of a layoff. So this Rams defense to start the year was impressing, frankly exceeding my expectations, because they weren't a great unit last year, especially those outside cornerbacks as injuries struck were super underperforming. This year, like metrics wise, they've been a better run defense than they have in years past under Wade Phillips, but I still think last week against San Francisco, they gave up too many drive moving plays. Even if the statistics weren't that great, the 49ers were able to keep control of the game and pace it pretty well with their run game. So that's a place where I still like Devonta Freeman, especially if this game gets high scoring, because he has a pretty good pass game role. He's scored 3 touchdowns the last 2 weeks, all through the air. I really like him there. And overall, I just think this defense has a lot of questions, and I sure as hell did not think I would be saying this in the year 2019, but I think the loss of Clay Matthews has been felt, because he wasn't, old Clay Matthews, but he was adding an extra layer on the blitzes that they would call out, and that's really how they design pressure outside of Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald's a one-man wrecking crew. He can do it all on his own, but you get Fowler on stunts and twists and things like that, and then you move Clay Matthews to rush off the edge on blitzes. That's really how they were designing a lot of pressure, and I think taking that one chess piece away for Wade Phillips and having to go deeper down the arsenal, I think that's been problematic for the defense the last few weeks.
Alex, how are you feeling about Atlanta? Because you've had Matt Ryan projected well for a couple weeks in a row now, and he's come through more often than not, throwing 43 passes a game, which is a lot. And they've certainly had to throw a lot to keep in games. So how are you feeling about the pass game here? And I'm assuming you're also not afraid of Jalen Ramsey in the matchup with Julio Jones.
I feel good about Matt Ryan. I mean, this is a situation where Atlanta's projected for 26 points, which is pretty high for him. The Falcons seem to have a knack for getting off to a bad start and being down in the game, which has led to Atlanta throwing the ball on 70% of plays compared to 30% rushing, which is it's the highest passing rate in the league, and in a spot where they're underdog versus the Rams, they should have to pass a lot again. The one caveat is that Matt Ryan, we have projected to be the most popular quarterback of the week. And, I mean, he's a great player. There's a lot of good guys to stack him with, like Julio. I'm especially looking to Sanu and Ridley as kind of value options, maybe pairing up with a couple of these guys. And you have a stack with a lot of potential, but it's not going to be sneaky.
How are you feeling about Austin Hooper? Because he's a guy who's going to have some decent ownership on him. The price hasn't come up a bunch, and he's getting targeted about as much as Julio. So, Alex, how are you feeling about Hooper, as a tight end pivot? We have some ownership that's pretty well spread out, it seems like, but a somewhat chalky play, but a guy who could be a pivot to maybe even chalkier plays like Darren Waller.
Yeah, that's true. He's not my favorite tight end of the week, but, I mean, he's been having a terrific season, and I don't see any reason to lay off of him if you have the Atlanta stack. But if I don't have Matt Ryan, I'm probably going to look to some other tight ends.
All right, let's keep it going here because we do have some other high-scoring games to touch on, including Arizona heading into a game with the Giants. A very high total here for the Giants, and Arizona's pace has been something we've talked about a lot on the show. We talked about pace earlier with Matt and Alex, and the pace has really been there for Arizona, the fastest-paced team in the league, taking snaps at just 24 seconds per snap. And the Giants, they've some weapons. I think that is something which they have not had, or at least were not perceived to have coming into the year. But even without Sterling Shepard in there, we're probably going to have Saquon Barkley back in there. Expecting to have Evan Ingram in there as well. Golden Tate is now back from his suspension. He looked decent in his first start. So, Matt, I'll ask you first here. How are you feeling about the Giants attack getting a pace-up spot against Arizona?
Love this matchup because it sets up so well for both offenses, how they like to play through the air. The Cardinals are number 2 in yards allowed to slot receivers. The Giants are number 6 in yards allowed to slot receivers. And both of these two offenses really only have slot receivers. So, hey, works out perfectly, right? I mean, for the Giants, obviously you mentioned Sterling Shepard probably not going to play, but Golden Tate was really the only guy that kind of got off last week against the Patriots. I expect that to really be his role again. Patrick Peterson going to be back in this spot, or he's come. Well, I don't think it's going to matter for Golden Tate because he's going to line up so much inside. So I think he's a guy that's still in play, probably pretty sneaky because I don't think a lot of people will click on him. Evan Ingram will obviously be, the highly chalk play, but he's still a guy that lines up in the slot as well too. And we know that the Cardinals have just been getting crushed by tight ends. And so I like the way this sets up. In addition to the pace, just the weaknesses within these two defenses seem to set up really well. Again, the Cardinals also, Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, if he goes, both of these guys are slot receivers, and they're really the only two target hogs in the passing offense outside of David Johnson. So I think this sets up as a gorgeous spot for both rookie quarterbacks, and it should be a pretty fun game. I don't know if it's going to be fun, real life game to watch, but it will definitely be a fun fantasy game.
Alex, how are you feeling about the Giants and Arizona as well? But the Giants, we are going to have some ownership for Saquon. It looks like also going to have some ownership for Evan Ingram, who's trickling up despite the high price point. He's been rising in our ownership projections throughout the week. So how are you feeling about the Giants first? And I guess, would you be willing to match the field on Saquon and Evan Ingram's ownership?
So I think Arizona is in a good spot, as the Giants D has kind of been pretty bad this year, but the Giants are in a really great spot here because Arizona's defense is pretty poor on a per play basis, and that they also play at such a fast pace that there are just more plays in the game. So I think the Giants rightfully are being looked to as one of the better teams for DFS this week. And I'm surprised to see that Saquon Barkley, returning from injury, is already back to super chalky status, being the second highest owned running back in our ownership projections.
Yeah, looks like a lot of ownership going to Saquon. We have him at about 20% on DraftKings and comparable everywhere else. And it seems like he's in a nice spot here. Really healed that ankle fast, but he's a freak of nature, so that does seem like that would check out. Any concerns at all? Matt, I'll ask you first. Any concerns at all for Daniel Jones here? Arizona does blitz at a high rate. Daniel Jones, as you'd expect with a rookie, has been kind of bad with pressure and also seems to have not the best pocket feel. Would that give you any cause for concern with Daniel Jones at a pretty high price point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's a guy on Yahoo's like $26. He's a pretty good value there. I think it's fine to play him. I wouldn't go all in because you mentioned like he has those disaster games in his range of outcomes pretty much every week. Obviously, it was going to happen against the Patriots last week, but he definitely has. I think he's kind of like the new Cutler, except he really, like everyone said during draft season, like that Drew Lock and Jay Cutler were kind of the same player, except Drew Lock probably, cares a little bit more. He doesn't have quite the same DGAF that Jay Cutler does. But, I mean, damn, Daniel Jones definitely plays that way, right? Like, he's not the same guy as Cutler off the field. They definitely do not have the same persona there. But, like, we saw that against Tampa Bay, great ceiling, right? But we saw that there's certainly that floor there as well. I mean, last week it's hard to say because it was just playing with so many preseason type bodies that I don't know if that's totally fair for Daniel Jones, but he certainly will throw the ball in places should not. He tries to write checks that his arm can't cash. So I think that's always within the range of outcomes, and especially against a team like Arizona that, they've got problems, right, on defense at all levels. But you mentioned they're pretty blitz happy. They're pretty aggressive. Chandler Jones is still a really good player, but this offensive line has played better in New York than I think anybody expected coming into this season. So I think he's a fair play, but he's not somebody that I'm willing to go completely all in on because of that just scary floor based on the way he plays.
And Alex, how are you feeling about Daniel Jones here? Because this is one thing that you've talked about in the past where you do have two highly owned targets for a quarterback. You can be worth some exposure, but that price point stuff, and we talked about some of the risks. So how are you feeling about Daniel Jones overall?
I'm not crazy about him because he is supposed to be pretty popular because of the matchup. He overall he hasn't been that great this year. He had that huge comeback for Tampa Bay, so people may fondly remember winning money with him in his debut as a starter. But sub 7 yards per attempt on passing plays so far this year, and I mean a lot of that was bad matchups, so I don't think it'll be that bad, but. At this point, I don't know if he's that much better than Eli Manning as far as passing.
Daniel Jones getting a tough run here, getting compared to Jay Cutler and Eli Manning.
I mean, I don't feel great about Daniel Jones. Maybe if there's some contests out there for the micro stakes, I might throw a dime on Danny Dimes.
There you go.
Yeah, 4.3% INT rate for Danny Jones. I'm giving him a nice little nickname there. Daniel Jones on the year, and maybe some cause for concern here. I think that blitz amount is really scary for a guy like Daniel Jones, who I just have not been impressed by his pocket awareness so far, despite his mobility. Let's keep going here. And guys, hit that like button. And of course, if you want to get the ownership projections we're talking about here, go to osmo.com/join. You can find packages as low as $3.95 a week on there. If you use the promo code contrary, you can also get half off your first month. It's about the best deal you'll find on any of the DFS sites out there. So go to osmo.com/join and find a package that works for you right now. Let's talk. Oh boy, here we go. Miami at Buffalo. So Josh Allen and the Bills tied for the highest implied total of the week. This is a great moment for all of us Josh Allen fans out there. Been touting this guy for 2 years now, and he's coming through. Going against Miami. Miami has a terrible total against them. The thing with Josh Allen, though, tough to find his targets. John Brown, he's had some injuries throughout the week. Looks like he'll be going. He and Cole Beasley, not highest upside guys in the world. We do have Frank Gore and Devin Singletary in the mix. So, Alex, how are you feeling about Josh Allen this week with a very high total and a matchup against Miami who cannot stop literally anything?
I think this is a situation where just kind of going off projections will lead you to a lot of Josh Allen. But the fact that this game isn't going to be particularly competitive in most instances versus Miami, who just really struggles. Buffalo having a strong defense, that makes me not like Josh Allen as much as some other quarterbacks in more competitive games, even like Daniel Jones. I think that, he's great at rushing and okay at passing. Playing against Miami may make him look good. John Brown is a pretty decent guy to pair him up with, so I can see that. And I gotta throw out Frank Gore here. I mean, revenge game. Yeah, Matt, I saw your video on the narratives this week. Revenge was one of them you talked about. How do you feel? Like, how long does a guy have to play on a certain team to qualify for revenge?
Oh, I mean, it counts if you spend. I mean, Carlos Hyde was on the Chiefs for like half a month, and he counted as a revenge game the other week. Totally went over 100 yards against them. So, I mean, revenge game never fails. Obviously, it's a foolproof narrative. You can't go wrong. I mean, and especially Frank Gore, who has like, a couple revenge games a year because he's played for so many teams. I mean, I think with Ryan Fitzpatrick, that's tough. Like, it's tough to say that that's a revenge. It's a revenge game for Ryan Fitzpatrick too. He's going to start. Used to play for the Bills, but Ryan Fitzpatrick literally has a revenge game every week because he's played for every damn team in the league. So, I mean, you gotta take that into account. But I do like Frank Gore still in this spot, like for real, because Singletary's a rookie. He's coming off injury. He played a lot of snaps last we saw him like take a full complement of a game, but didn't get the most rushing work that went to Frank Gore. So I think he's still in play for me. He wouldn't be, I think if Singletary was going to miss the game, he'd be close to a lock for me against Miami. But in this spot, I think you got to be a little bit cautious just because of the rookie's presence, but I still like Frank Gore an awful lot.
Yeah, Frank Gore's price a little bit high for Frank Gore standards, but it makes more sense if he has all the volume and he has that workload. And it's easy to imagine him getting 2 touchdowns this week just because, the Buffalo really should be able to move the ball at will. But yeah, it's tough with Singletary in there. Singletary's so explosive, and he seems like he deserves a bigger role than he had pre-injury. But after the hamstring issue, it's kind of hard to expect that. Alex, would you play some of the receivers as one-offs here? John Brown, Cole Beasley, any of these guys appealing to you as if you're not going to stack with Josh Allen?
I think the price is pretty high on all these guys compared to really how I have them rated. John Brown, he's had some good games so far. So I think he'd be kind of the guy to go to for one-offs. Trying to pull up their snaps real quick.
I like John Brown a lot. I know I'm a longtime John Brown truther, so that's a surprise to no one, but he's been getting the volume this year, 39 targets, 34% of the team air yards, and he hasn't been used. Like last year we saw in Baltimore, he had like a 17, 18-yard ADOT when he was playing well with Joe Flacco and on pace for 1,000 yards. But this year he's down to like 13.6 average depth of target. So he's been getting more traditional number one usage, for what that's worth in Buffalo. And he has 5+ catches in all but one game this year. So I think he's in a good spot here. And also I know, Xavier Howard, he's one of the better cornerbacks in the league. And Brian Flores is still saying he might go this week, but he also doesn't want to risk a setback. Obviously when you're tanking, you don't want to risk your best player, one of your better players getting hurt. So, we saw him just, not suit up just because last week. And Terry McLaurin does 2 touchdowns on the Dolphins here. So I think we could see Brown have a pretty similar type of line. I think he's a guy that I'd risk playing standalone even without Allen.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Getting 1.8 deep targets per game as well for John Brown, and we know he's got that game-breaking ability, so if he has a floor with some of the shorter routes and can break one against Miami, which he does seem likely he's capable of, certainly can get there, and the ownership seems like it'll be with it. So John Brown, not the chalkiest play in the world, but somebody will have some ownership. YouTube chat really wants to talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick's side of the equation, it seems, so I guess let's talk about that real fast. Alex, how much Ryan Fitzpatrick will you have with this 12.3 implied total?
Well, maybe the chat can talk me into it here because I'm not on it. But if I was trying to build a Ryan Fitzpatrick lineup, maybe I'll throw Albert Wilson in there. I probably am not leaning to Albert Wilson yet because coming back from injury last week, he didn't play that much of the game, only about half. But he's put up pretty stellar numbers even with bad quarterbacks in Miami. So if he's healthier this week than people expect, he could easily win. Well, I won't say easily. He could win someone to slate. It's possible.
Let's talk about the defense for Buffalo too, because we actually have them being the top owned defense of the week, despite being the highest priced one on all the sites out there. Obviously going to be a great matchup for them going against Miami. Ryan Fitzpatrick turning it over, 6% interception rate on the year, and Buffalo's defense actually a very good defense. We've seen them thwart Tom Brady. I think if you can thwart Tom Brady, you can probably oppress Ryan Fitzpatrick. But Alex, I know you don't love paying up for defenses. How are you feeling about a chalk Buffalo defense that's going to be that highly priced?
Yeah, you said it. Ryan Fitzpatrick throws the interceptions. His interception rate was 5% last year. It's more than 5% this year. This is twice as many interceptions as a normal quarterback. And because Miami is behind so much in games, they're just airing the ball out. I'm sure that's when a lot of these interceptions occur, which is in garbage time. So you gotta love the Bills defense.
Matt, are you cool with the Buffalo defense given the fact that they're so highly priced?
Yeah, this Miami offense is just such a nightmare. And Fitzpatrick, I guess the only reason we really should be talking about him is, against Buffalo's defense. Buffalo's defense was playing really well, before they went on their bye. So I expect this to be a pretty good game for them. And, sometimes I definitely usually like to pay down for defenses too. I've been looking at, options like Houston on the cheaper end this week. But they're going to be missing Bradley Roby. That one just came out. He didn't travel with the team. So I don't know. There's definitely some spots where I'm going to be tempted to pay up. for the Buffalo defense, and then have to sit there and decide if Alan Lazard is really going to be in my Week 7 lineups, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think Buffalo's an interesting play, and it does seem they should have a decent floor, and they can have some upside because, again, Fitzpatrick turns it over a lot, and Buffalo is a legitimately good defense who gets pressure and just defends well, deflects 20% of passes, so they are around the ball causing damage, and that could be a big problem for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Let's keep going here. Jacksonville at Cincinnati. Going to have Leonard Fournette as a very chalky play, it looks like, going against a Cincinnati defense that gives up 5.3 yards per rush, which is not a perfect stat, but they've just been bad and giving up a ton of rushing yards to everybody, including Lamar Jackson. And is it going to be worth trusting Leonard Fournette? Is that an option for you, Alex, at high volume? It's going to be chalky again. Last week he was chalky, didn't quite get there, didn't have a bad day, but certainly not a tournament-winning day. How are you feeling about Fournette in this spot, Alex?
I mean, I think he's the top play of the slate, probably. I mean, Jacksonville has like a great matchup versus Cincinnati. He's really the guy racking up the fantasy points. If they're ahead in the game, that should be particularly true. So I think that the fact that he's just on the field almost every play for Jacksonville makes him probably one of the most likely people to have a big game in fantasy this week.
Matt, how are you feeling about Fournette here? The volume's been there, and he's going against a Cincinnati team that gives up 185 rushing yards per game. Is this a spot where you'd be willing to go to a chalky Fournette?
Love it. Yeah, I mean, this is like stunning stuff, but he's on pace for almost 70 catches this year. No running back has run more routes than him this year. Again, given his skill set and what we thought of him as kind of more of a grinder back, that's pretty stunning. He's cleared 20 touches in all games since week 3. I mean, he's a volume monster, and this is an incredible matchup. I'm all in on Fournette this week for sure. I also think the passing game is interesting, though. They're going to be outside. They're going to be out both of their starting cornerbacks, William Jackson and Drake Kirkpatrick, for the Cincinnati side. So, maybe get some Minshew action. As Foles is looking like he might be healthy soon. I don't know. That's going to be a fun story to track. But yeah, Fournette. I mean, he's a great play this week, and honestly, like, he has been the ultimate trust the volume type of play. Like, we all remember that Thursday night game against Tennessee, 69 yards long run, but finishes with like 66 yards on the night. That's not what you want to see. But I mean, he's been getting the volume ever since, and it's just, you're just trusting it. And overall, like you said, wasn't a smash game last week, but a pretty solid one. I think this could be, a multi-touchdown type 100-yard rushing effort here.
Yeah, Fournette's certainly the cash game lock of the week for sure, with a lot of tournament potential, but he's going to be very highly owned, almost 40% on some of the sites. DJ Chark getting a better matchup here than he had last week, going against Marshawn Lattimore, so a lot of him outside. And that's a matchup too. Lattimore started the year slow, kind of came on strong, and Chark, I don't think you expect Chark to be great in that matchup. But Matt, you mentioned the passing game here, and Chark's been a beast on the year despite that one-down game. Is he somebody you'd have interest in without a lot of ownership expected?
Yeah, that's definitely a play I want to go back to after a slow game last week. He's still kind of an unknown. There was a really interesting nugget from Chris Collinsworth on the Sunday Night Football broadcast between the Saints and the Cowboys, where it was like Marshawn Lattimore apparently kind of only gets up for the big games, like against Mike Evans and Amari Cooper. Like, he wants to shut those guys down, but can sort of – and then Collinsworth straight up said, like, he said – maybe he's lazy or something like that. He just doesn't work against other guys, but he put in the work against DJ Chark last week. And I think that total guesswork. Talk about narrative, total guesswork here, but like, maybe that does show some respect to DJ Chark, who's been a beast this year. He has a 39% share of the team air yards. He's been great on deep passes. He's been great in tight spaces, uncontested throws. I think you go back to him here, especially with those cornerback injuries in Cincinnati.
Alex, let's talk about the running game for Cincinnati, because I do think that the price point for Joe Mixon stands out. You don't have him projected terribly well, and the touches have been down a bit for him, and Cincinnati also not running at a high clip. It's a 29% rushing rate for them on the year. But Mixon's cheap, and we have seen big upside from him, and Jacksonville's run defense also not the best in the league by any stretch. So, Alex, would you have any interest in Joe Mixon here at not much ownership and, again, a very cheap price?
Yeah, I think you should be interested. Depending on the site, his price varies kind of throughout the industry. He's cheapest on Yahoo at $14, so he makes a really nice kind of value option there.
Tell me about it. Ugh.
Yeah, and on the other sites, FanDuel might be the next cheapest. So I like him better on the half-point PPR sites. But spending down at running back is usually a pretty big opportunity cost for missing out on some of those higher price guys. So I can't fully endorse it, but it seems pretty reasonable based on the value.
Matt, any interest at all for you, the Cincinnati offense, Tyler Boyd or Mixon?
God, the brutal part about Mixon is, he's not even running the most routes out of the backfield. Giovanni Bernard has 108. Mixon has 85. He's not even in the top 25 in the entire league in terms of routes run. He's not really even getting much production in the passing game either, which is such a bummer because I think he's a pretty good receiver. And obviously they're always trailing. So you'd think that would be a way to move the ball, but it just hasn't happened. So I do like Tyler Boyd. I think that's a good suggestion. He's been a solid target hog, and I wouldn't totally hate a dart throw at Auden Tate again, considering the outside cornerbacks for Jacksonville, obviously a little weaker than we thought coming into the year. And Tate's been getting volume. He's been running routes, and he's been playing reasonably well, at least from a bottom line fantasy perspective. So I don't hate that dart throw there.
Yeah, I think that checks out. Let's keep going here. We do have another game, two formerly great defenses in Baltimore at Seattle. They're allowing over 350 yards per game, and Seattle projects for pretty high ownership for pretty much all their position players. Russell Wilson's looked great, probably the MVP at this point in the league, especially with Patrick Mahomes getting hurt and taking that down tick. So, Alex, let me ask you first here. How are you feeling about this game? Is this one that you're trying to stack up? Do you think it has the potential to have production on both sides?
I think it's a good game, but not my favorite of the week. I think that Baltimore is they're a team that runs pretty long drives as far as number of plays, so they usually have a lot more plays in the game than their opponents because they're so effective at running the ball, and that might keep Seattle down in the number of plays they run to some extent because there are only a certain number of plays in the game to be distributed between the two teams. So Baltimore being the underdog, I think that they might not be as successful at scoring points, but they will kind of sustain a lot of drives. Marquise Brown being out potentially could be a big boost to Willie Snead and Mark Andrews. So I think the stack of Lamar Jackson plus one of those guys is pretty decent. And then Seattle, I think they're going to be pretty popular. They're in a good spot, but not a great one for the reasons I mentioned.
Matt, how are you feeling about Seattle here? Russell Wilson going to be not too highly owned, but it looks like Tyler Lockett and Chris Carson should have some ownership on them. The passing game has been really successful in short bursts. I mean, not a ton of volume so far, though Russ has kind of seen more than I think we thought going in. How are you feeling about the Seattle offense?
Yeah, I think Alex makes some great points about this game because you look at it on paper, right? And it's stunning that we're talking about the Baltimore Ravens and Seattle Seahawks possibly engaging in a shootout. That would not be our expectations based on the reputation of these two teams, but that's how effective that their offenses have been this year. However, they do both want to run the ball. Baltimore's run heavy. Seattle wants to be run heavy, and that could really slow down the pace of the game. As you mentioned, it could take the total under. I wouldn't be surprised to see that either. And also it's worth noting, like you mentioned, Marquise Brown is out for Seattle. They're going to be missing Will Dissly, obviously. And those are two big losses, I think. Marquise Brown has shown in his young NFL career that he is a true difference maker. And while, there's Will Dissly's, not up to that standard, I think he was really providing a nice security blanket over the middle of the field that I think you take away. And now you got to wonder, Tyler Lockett, I think he's definitely a number one receiver and is a good play every week, and including this week where Baltimore allows over 14 yards per catch to wide receivers. But DK Metcalf hasn't quite developed into a reliable presence. But I think this could be a week actually to throw DK Metcalf out there because, Baltimore obviously in flux at the cornerback position. They just trade for Marcus Peters. They say Marcus Peters is going to play a lot. And if you know anything about Marcus Peters, he's a gambler. He doesn't necessarily always end up in the right place. So I wouldn't totally, mind a dart throw on DK Metcalf. I've said this every week because he's running a lot of routes. He's playing really well based on where he was drafted. Like, it's not too early to say they kind of hit a home run there at the end of the second round based on just what he's given them so far, which is like quality starting receiver play. But based on the way he's used, based on how he's just been running a ton of routes, I think he's going to win, somebody a tournament one week. And it wouldn't be totally surprising against this Baltimore defense that's in flux in the secondary if that happens in this spot.
Yeah, 15 air yards per target for DK Metcalf has been a bit of a home run threat, but also does get some red zone looks as well. So certainly a player who has some upside and could be needed more as with Dissly out there because Luke Wilson probably not going to be running the Dissly role as much as you want. Nice guy, though. Enjoyed him on Hard Knocks.
Yeah. Looks good on a boat, man. Looks good on a boat. That hair, again, long hair. You know that's my thing.
Yeah, he and Jake Kumro. I bet Aaron Rodgers would enjoy Luke Wilson. He had some time with him. We didn't do that on the air, so I don't know. Probably not a callback it needed to do. Let's talk about Houston at Indianapolis. This is a game where we're going to have some chalk ownership for a few guys here, particularly T.Y. Hilton, who's just a bit underpriced industry-wide and has been a well-targeted player, not the home run threat he's been in the past always, still getting over 7 targets a game, and is certainly a safety blanket for Jacoby Brissett. Houston's defense not been that great on the year. And Indianapolis's defense actually has performed well in terms of limiting the opposing teams, but on a per-play basis, not seeming that great, giving up over 5 yards per rush. PFF grades kind of bad across the board as well. So, Alex, I'll ask you first, and maybe this is the game that you were hinting at. You like this Houston at Indianapolis game, and would it be one that you might want to stack up?
Yeah, possibly. I think that there might be some low ownership here. I think that Houston particularly has a pretty good passing attack. They got some great players and Hopkins and Fuller. Hopkins, of course, has taken a big swing in his usage this year, but that might just make him a good contrarian pay up spot. So I think that could work out well. Indianapolis, they really only have one receiver that's viable for fantasy in T.Y. Hilton. They kind of run a deeper rotation with Kane, Chester Rogers, and Zach Pascal all playing kind of in a rotation, so none of them are on the field quite enough to be justified in fantasy, and Doyle and Ebron kind of the same thing.
Yeah, those guys are running Zach Pascal running 16 routes per game, Paris Campbell running 17 routes per game, and T.Y. Hilton only running 28, though I think that might account for some injury time for him. But certainly some risk there. Matt, how are you feeling about this game here? Because Houston is a team who's really been explosive lately. Deshaun Watson also, I think, in that MVP mix. And DeAndre Hopkins hasn't had that big game yet, but it seems like he's getting the targets and is maybe due for some positive TD regression at some point. So how are you feeling about the options in this one?
Yeah, 28% of the team targets right now. Obviously, he's behind Will Fuller in air yards, which is not surprising, but 56 targets on the year. I think he's going to have one of those weeks. The only problem is just he has not been used vertically as much. His average depth of target is down almost 2 full yards from the last 2 years. And I think a lot of that has to do with Kenny Stills being there as well. You know, really outside of Hopkins, Kiki Cutie's kind of funny because they really use him just as like a short area pop gun receiver. But I think he also is a speed threat as well. So they have guys who can be used vertically, and Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, and Kiki Cute. So I like all these guys are kind of sucking some of the vertical element out of Hopkins' game, but the targets are still there. I think overall he's still a number 1 wide receiver. And the deal with these players, like stuff happens sometimes in fantasy, right? Like sometimes it just goes that way. Like, and that's the like people ask all the time, like, what's wrong with DeAndre Hopkins? And it's just kind of like sometimes stuff happens, you know, like, and this is one of those just slow stretches. And it wouldn't be surprising at all. Like if a stud player you have on your fantasy team is getting volume and the role hasn't changed and the offense hasn't really changed, and I don't think any of that's true in Houston. Still the same offense, still the same quarterback. Actually, the offense I think is better because the protection's been getting a little bit better. Deshaun Watson hasn't been sacked in either of the last 2 weeks. So to me, I'm just trusting Hopkins, and I like the idea of paying up, you know, to be contrarian here with him against a Colts secondary that has been, you know, a little bit under expectations so far this year.
Yeah, I think that checks out. DeAndre Hopkins just seems like he's due for better days. And, you know, with more weapons in there, I mean, the tight ends have been used more. There's just a lot of ways that things have gone wrong for him, which is not getting the TD looks quite as much when you have Darren Fells and Jordan Akins getting insanely high TD rates for both those guys, both over Akins at an 11% TD rate with his catches, Fells at a 19%. That'll level out a bit, and you should see more Hopkins in the coming weeks. Alex, let me turn it over to you. Any games here that we haven't hit on that seem particularly appealing?
Man, there's some real duds in here. Like, let's see, we got Chicago and New Orleans. That one could be a little bit interesting with Alvin Kamara out. Matt, I know you were talking in your narratives, the backup running back. Not necessarily a lock to replace the work of the starter. I think Kamara being out, you got Latavius Murray coming in, but then maybe Dwayne Washington or Zach Zenner maybe replacing Murray in that spot. So how are you grading him out this week?
Yeah, I think if you have Murray in like a season-long fantasy league, you probably got to play him. Like, I know they're playing the Bears, but don't forget Josh Jacobs just kind of ripped up this team last time we saw the Oakland Raiders and the Chicago Bears in London. So I think Murray's a fine play. I would sprinkle him into DFS lineups because he's cheap, but I'm not like willing to go all in on him because I think this should be a pretty slow game overall. So and Murray also to me is kind of a jag. Like I think he's just a guy, but in just a guy role in the Saints offense, even with Teddy Bridgewater, I think you got to play him a little bit.
Yeah, that implied total for New Orleans has come down a bit as well with no Alvin Kamara in there, down to 16.5 implied points for New Orleans. Alex, your guy, Mitchell Trubisky, coming back into the lineup here, going against a New Orleans defense who has stepped it up, it seems, with Teddy Bridgewater at QB. They seem to know they have to pull a little bit more weight than when Drew Brees is in there. How are you feeling about Mitch and his return? Can he have that big day? Because he has been a tournament winner in the past in somewhat unexpected spots.
Chris, I regret to inform you, but me and Mitch had a DFS breakup here.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up it.
Yeah. I think last time I looked, he was under 6 yards per attempt this year as far as passing. But I think that in this game, maybe Allen Robinson would be a sleeper pick. And I think Michael Thomas could be a nice play because Kamara takes a lot of the targets. So with Murray being a much less effective receiving back, then Michael Thomas might get a bigger share of the throws that Bridgewater makes.
That makes sense. All right, let's keep going here. And Matt, any games for you that jump out? Maybe Minnesota, Detroit, because I do think we have some plays here that we haven't hit on, and maybe one of them speaks to your soul in a way that you want to bring to the people.
I like that game. There are some spots that I like there, but the game that we haven't talked about that I really like and I'm really looking forward to is Raiders at Packers. I think this game has a ton of intriguing plays, including in the backfield. Green Bay, obviously we don't know what's going to happen considering the fact that we saw Aaron Jones kind of literally drop some opportunity last time we saw the Packers play, and then Jamal Williams comes and beats up on the Lions. I think that is interesting there, but really Josh Jacobs on the other side is much more interesting to me. He dropped 123 rushing yards, 20 more through the air on the Bears defense last time we saw them, and the Packers they stifled Kerryon Johnson a decent amount on Monday Night Football, but they still give up over 5 yards per carry on the season, or close to 5 yards per carry. So that's been the weakest part of their much improved defense. And Jacobs is a guy that I really like this week. And just overall, the Packers have given up a lot of production to wide receivers. Obviously, Tyrell Williams is going to miss this game. I don't know if there's any sleeper plays there, but it still could be something for Derek Carr. Like, the offensive line has played better in Oakland than I think a lot of people expected to. And the Smith guys have been getting after for Green Bay, but I just want to watch this game too to see, I think Aaron Rodgers played great on Monday night. Obviously they had some help from the officiating, but be that as it may, I think this game could be pretty high scoring and really fun to watch. And I think there's some under talked about plays in this one. Obviously we've mentioned the Lazard thing here and there, but overall I really like this game, and especially Josh Jacobs.
Alex, I know you mentioned in your tweet about Trevor Davis, another spot here. I'm sure a guy as illustrious at least as Alan Lazard. How are you feeling about Oakland here, Josh Jacobs? I mean, the various plays, and I guess do you want to give your thoughts on Lazard, because I know you did tweet at people about him not being in the projections.
Yeah, so I went through and I updated my projections this morning for Green Bay. I was surprised that Geronimo Allison was upgraded from doubtful to questionable, which makes me think that maybe he'll come back from concussion this Sunday, even though he wasn't expected to. And then Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a big question mark as well, not really having practiced much. So I think that I'll wait to see what happens there. If one of the two are out, then Jake Kumerow becomes pretty appealing, and then Alan Lazard may be that kind of a feel-good play that a lot of people will gravitate to, and I'm a little hesitant to kind of jump on board there. But I did mention Trevor Davis. He got traded by Green Bay to Oakland at the start of the season, and he is playing the most of any wide receiver with Tyrell Williams out. So maybe he makes a Lambeau leap this week.
And they also have Zay Jones now, of course, a Josh Allen alum who could be interesting as well. But it does seem like it's going to be tough for Darren Waller, who's going to be pretty highly owned. It looks like he was going to be chalkier earlier in the week. It seems like that's come down a bit. Alex, how do you feel about Waller, given the fact that really they don't have a lot of receivers who are going to take attention away from him?
I think he's just too cheap because he is out there on the field during passing plays almost as much as any other tight end in the league. Being out there about 80% of the time when Carr drops back. And he's been really effective with the targets he has gotten so far. And when you add that up with kind of a mid-price point across the industry, I think that is kind of a lock play just because of the volume. As far as being open, I mean, tight ends run a lot of kind of short routes, so I'm not as worried about maybe separation.
Matt, do you have any thoughts at all on the Oakland receiving here and Waller in particular?
Yeah, I think Waller probably, he basically, as you mentioned, he's like used like a wide receiver. I think that's good against Green Bay, considering they've allowed a good amount of production. They've, taken some passes away too. Like their passer rating allowed is not all that high, but we saw Monday night they gave up some big plays to Detroit. They're top 10 in yards allowed to wide receivers on the season, and I think considering how Waller's used, he probably still qualifies as that. He's been running a lot of routes against zone coverage as well, which is pretty, standard for used as kind of that big slot receiver. So he'd be the only guy I'm willing to play, though. The rest of these Oakland receivers are just way too questionable to me without Tyrell Williams.
That makes sense. All right, guys, hit that like button because we are in the home stretch here. We're going to give our plays of the week and our fades of the week at each position, our contrarian plays rather of the week. And of course, thank you to Fantasy Draft, the official home of break-free daily fantasy out there. Go to fantasydraft.com right now and use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free 7-day trial. Check out the Hooters main event. Of course, had a lot of big wins from our own staff, including AWESEMO. Took down some big wins there. So a lot of success from people on Fantasy Draft. And again, paying rake is just a mistake for you. Didn't mean to make that rhyme, but go check out fantasydraft.com and use that promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free 7-day trial. All right, let's go. Matt, you are the guest here. You are the guest of honor. Let's start with you. Your contrarian QB pick for week 7. Who would it be?
Yeah, I think for me it would be Gardner Minshew because, as we mentioned earlier, Leonard Fournette is going to be highly, highly chalky. I think that's the way most people expect Jacksonville to attack. But I still think he, for a low-owned quarterback, I like him because of the touchdown potential against his Cincinnati defense that's missing so many of its cornerbacks and just really hasn't been good overall on the year. So, yeah, to me, I think Gardner Minshew, if you kind of stack him with DJ Chark, there's a lot of potential upside there.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian QB pick?
I like Minshew. I'm going to go with the quarterback in the same game here, Andy Dalton. I mean, not a guy who's had any success so far this year, but we're talking contrarian QBs, and he certainly fits that bill with a 1.3% ownership this week. And I have him as about a 3% chance of being the top passer of the week. So you can find that at my top stacks tool. But the opportunity's there. He's got some good players, or maybe good is an overstatement with Tyler Boyd and Auden Tate, but they're players. They're going to be on the field. And
they're players.
And they are going to be on the field.
Yes.
They are players.
They're there, and I might take some shots on that.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Jacoby Brissett. I think he's an interesting spot here. T.Y. Hilton going to have that ownership, and I think this game does have some potential to score points if Houston does kind of do what they've been doing. And Brissett, I think, has actually been pretty decent on the year. Not a great quarterback, but a cheap price, and I'm willing to take that dart toss. And it was either him or Ryan Tannehill, and I think we'll choose the lesser of two evils there. Alex, on to you, contrarian running back pick for week 7.
Oof, I should have marked these down ahead of time here. Maybe I'd go, let's see, we haven't talked about this game at all, but Melvin Gordon, I feel like everyone is super down on him because he hasn't had much success since returning from his holdout. But he's getting the work that we're accustomed to, maybe having like a 60-40 split with Austin Eckler. I can't guarantee that will happen this week because he's been pretty poor in the past couple of weeks, but we know this is a top-tier talent, so I might take some shots on him.
Matt, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian running back pick?
Yeah, for me, it's Todd Gurley because we know that the passing game will get most of the ownership. I think Gurley will come in pretty low owned. And, last time we saw him, he was, a 93% snap player. I like that they gave him the week off, and he's still getting that usage in scoring area. 2 touchdowns in the red zone in week 4, 2 touchdowns in the red zone in week 5. 2 of those in week 5 came inside the 10-yard line. So I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. He's still running a lot of routes, too. If he's going to be out there against this, trash can Atlanta defense, I think I'm going to play him.
Yeah, and he looked good in that last game, too, against Seattle. So, I mean, there's definitely some hope for him being back to what he looked like previously. I'm going to go to Tevin Coleman. I think the spot, I know, Matt, I know you tweeted about Shanahan revenge. A lot of people seem to think Shanahan's going to throw it through the air to really get his full revenge on Washington. I think he's going to cram it down their throats. Tevin Coleman seems like he sees the lead role, got most of the red zone work. I think things look good for him at a mid price, not much ownership. I think he's a dude that I like quite a bit. Matt, who would be your contrarian wide receiver pick for week 7?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in that game actually, and stay with with Marquise Goodwin. Super cheap. I think people will go to Dante Pettis as a guy that could dust this Washington secondary, but we know that with Pettis, obviously he's the deep threat. He's still getting the vertical looks. He has the highest average depth of target among the wide receivers. It's thin because you can't count on a bunch of targets, and I think it's quite possible that you do see what you said, that they come out and they run the football all over Washington. But I really think Shanahan wants to windmill dunk on this team, and I think he will. And I think Goodwin could be part of that, getting a couple deep looks and then could really make your week at a cheap price.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian wide receiver?
Man, I had it just a second ago. Then I started looking at my fade of the week, so I lost it temporarily. Oh, all right, here we go. Darius Slaton. This is a guy who started the year injured, so he wasn't really on the field. He's all in all played 111s. He's ran 111 routes, got targeted on 20 of them for 18% clip. He played almost every snap last game for the Giants. So if you're just looking at game-by-game numbers, you may overlook that this guy is really getting it done when he's been out on the field, and now he's out on the field all game. So I think that Sterling Shepard being out is another reason why his workload is kind of locked in there, and I think more people are going to be on Evan Ingram and Golden Tate and Barkley.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go, so this is a weird one. I'm going to go to A.J. Brown. I just like what I see from him in terms of yards after catch. I mean, one of the better yards after catch above expectation type players out there. And the Chargers defense, one of the most poorly graded, tackling defenses according to PFF. Just a 36 grade from them in that category. And Brown, just a big body dude who seems to get out there into space. I think he's an interesting play today. I don't think that you could trust Tannehill. I think tomorrow it could be a nice spot for A.J. Brown at very cheap prices. All right, and the fade of the week, as Alex hinted at, the most frustrating spot to be sometimes. So, Matt, it's a lot of fun when you make this pick and you are completely wrong. So who is your fade? Don't be completely wrong.
I just wanted to say that's a good call about A.J. Brown, like on the missed tackles from the Chargers defense. And I love him as a player. He's so good. I'm going to go easy, though, for fade of the week. I guess based on how hot this player has been, it's tough to say this is an easy one, but I think Terry McLaurin's not an option this week against San Francisco. We know that this defense has played lights out, and the scary part about saying to fade Washington's passing game here, which Washington's pass game basically just means Terry McLaurin. We saw in week 3, against Chicago, Case Keenum goes out, throws 3 picks, fumbles, like 3 more times. So I think basically that's possible. However, in that same game, he still put up 332 yards and 2 touchdowns, and obviously Terry McLaurin was one of the recipients of those touchdowns. So I don't think you play Terry McLaurin this week, but he's been, dusting us ever since. And I think he's got, some touchdown regression coming. So to me, he's not an option, but you do know that Washington can put up points in garbage time. But I'm willing to say that, again, that Shanahan windmill dunk is going to come down on this team, and they're not going to do anything in garbage time.
Alex, who is your fade of the week? You've been thinking about it with love for this entire time. So who is it going to be?
Man, I got a hot one here. Chris Carson. He's been kind of the hot player of the last 3 weeks, getting 22, 27, and 24 carries in each week, and also getting some targets. But Rashad Penny is healthy now. He hasn't played in any of the previous games, and when we saw Penny play, it was about a 2-to-1 split for Carson, which would be a downgrade as far as his usage. And to boot, I think Baltimore, although they've given up a lot of yardage this year, Seattle doesn't have a tremendous edge in this game if you go off the Vegas line of about 3. So I think that Carson is far from a sure play here.
I'm going to go with Darren Waller for mine. I get the volume stuff that Alex mentioned. I think volume is certainly king always in DFS, but I do think there's really nothing else you have to stop right now for Oakland. Josh Jacobs is a player you have to stop, but in terms of the receiving game, I just think Green Bay's that secondary is clearly a strength for them. They're holding opposing QBs at 57% completion rate. I think Waller's certainly a fine player, but I don't see the tournament winning upside. He's fine in cash, but I just don't think he's the guy in tournaments I want when you have Evan Ingram and Mark Andrews, some of those other guys. that's it. Matt, this is the spot here. We've stolen completely from Hot Ones, but we want to give you the floor here to turn and plug whatever you want, whether it's Yahoo or anything in your life.
Yeah, I mean, just follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @MattHarmon_BYB on both outlets. And, check us out on Fantasy Football Live every Sunday morning. Liz Lowe's and I are holding it down in LA and actually paying attention to the chat room. You see these big media broadcasts will go out, live on Twitter and live on whatever, Facebook and all that stuff. And then no one pays attention to the chat room. No, I'm paying attention to you, the people. So, yeah, you can find all my content on Twitter. I'll put it out all there, but just check us out.
Yeah, go follow at @MattHarmon_BYB right now, doing a lot of great work over there. And also the team at Yahoo doing a really great stuff as well for a large media company. I mean, we certainly hold ourselves in some esteem, but in terms of the actual big media companies doing what you want to see from a fantasy sports coverage, that you guys do a fantastic job and have a lot of great personalities, and Matt's content's fantastic. Alex, turn the floor over to you. Any final words here for week 7?
Yeah, Matt, thanks so much for being on the show, man. You truly are the renaissance man of fantasy football, covering it all with the deep analytics like reception, perception, but also telling us what we really want to know every week, the narratives.
Yes.
So I really appreciate the diversity of your work, and be sure to follow Matt here. And thanks.
Get you a man that can do both, people.
Man, that was a great callback, man. Thanks, Fantasydraft, of course, for sponsoring the show. I enjoy playing on the main event every weekend. They just charge less money to play fantasy football, and that equates to more money in your pocket that you could potentially spend on some Hooters wings. And finally, I'm going to be heading to our premium Slack chat, the Office Hours channel, right after this, and answering everyone's questions about DFS or anything else you guys are wanting to talk about.
Yeah, so go to awesome.com/join and get a membership now if you want to go participate. Alex does a great job in those office hours. Answers literally everything that people have. There's always a ton of questions in there. And even if you're not participating, there's some fun stuff to surmise from what Alex is talking about with other folks. And we'll be back with a bunch of content tomorrow, live before lock here on this channel. So subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll see you guys again soon. Good luck in week 7. Bye, guys.